Welcome to Group Y Live. I'm your host, Ollie Russell Cowan. I'm super excited to be joined this week by the CMO of Firestone Walker, Dustin Hinz. We're going to be talking about his journey as a musician, then working in the music industry at Guitar Center, Ernie Music Man, and then his transition through to the beer industry, looking after 805, the differences between working with artists, athletes, looking at the whole landscape of branding, content creation, and marketing. Let's jump into it. Hey, Dustin, how are you, man?
Good, Ollie. How are you, dude?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, good to have you on. No, we're kind of chatting briefly just before, and just kind of talking about the ride that it's been. I guess coming from 20 years in music, and yeah, I mean, we're going to probably jump all over the place if that's cool with you, but I'd love to kick it off with like growing up as a musician, and then how you kind of got into the industry to start off with, and
good question.
The whole journey since then, man.
Yeah, I have this like belief, and it's a little esoteric, and it tends to freak people out, especially over a couple of like tequilas and tacos. Like I start talking about like the Gaia and the great antenna theory of like we're all sort of born kind of calibrated to do something, and the question is like how early in your life can you figure it out? You get some of these like chess masters when they're like 3 or 4 years old, or Mozart was 4 when he wrote his first symphony or something like that. And then there's other people that you find these like opera singers that are plumbers, and they just didn't figure that out. And I think that I was lucky enough when I was, I think 13 or 14, I got my first guitar. And I'm 6'5", I'm left-handed. My parents wanted me to play sports, but I got my guitar, and that was sort of it. Everything else just melted away. It's all I wanted to do. And after seeing my first show at the Palladium in LA, I started a band and at like 14, and got my way through high school. And I remember as I got out of high school, my mom said to me over my graduation dinner, she said, "All right, so like on Monday you're gonna get a job, you're gonna go to school, or you're gonna get the fuck out. Those are your options." And I was like, "I'm in a band. What are you talking about? Like my band's gonna make it." And so she was actually working for the CEO at Guitar Center at the time. This is 1997. So I was 17 years old, and I begged her to get me a job like in the mailroom, and she did. And she's like, "You got 3 months. After 3 months, you got to go." And then I ended up being there for 18 years. So I worked my way up, and I fell in love with marketing. Obviously, I still held on to wanting to be a musician for, until my late 20s. And I still am, but I mean, I still wanted to try to make it in my 20s. But but I fell in love with marketing because it was just this natural evolution of storytelling and creative, and it allowed me to take this passion that I had for making, at the time, music, and then learning that I could turn that into like photography and film and the art that is advertising. And I had to learn all the blocking and tackling of like, strategic marketing. I had a lot of really good leaders and, over the years that helped me do that. And I just sort of fell in love with it, and I never really looked back. So that's how I sort of ended up doing what I'm doing now. I mean, realistically, I should probably be hanging drywall or something, but somehow I still continue to have a career in the marketing business.
And how did you see it evolve, like from the sort of the content side of things of marketing, kind of starting off early on?
Good question.
And like that, like, just the different formats, and this is kind of almost the birth of social, right? Or like when that...
Yeah, I mean, fuck, I'm going to be 45 this year. I remember when there was no YouTube. Like the first thing that we did, it was with Slash from Guns N' Roses, and we were doing this thing for a grand opening of a Guitar Center, and it was with my good friend Brian Ball at Ernie Ball, where I ended up working for a few years before I ended up in beer. But we just had this idea. We were doing this thing with Slash, and we're like, it was trying to solve a challenge out of necessity. Like, hey, we are going to have a problem. We're only X amount of people are going to be able to see this. So how do we like capture it and broadcast this to like some more people like all over the country? could see what we're going to do with Slash, because we were getting to do this cool thing that he hadn't done in a long time. And this was like, Slash was like, this was like Guitar Hero kind of window, I think, if I remember correctly, maybe a little earlier than that. But so someone was like, yeah, there's this new thing called YouTube. It was kind of like right around then. And so we recorded the whole thing. We started getting into YouTube, and that was sort of, and it did really well. I'm sure it's still up somewhere. We could probably go find it. And that sort of turned into this vehicle about how do we,
this was the long form documentary, right? This was like the...
No,
like
this was like, dude, this is like a decade before that. This is like the film was like 2015 or 2014, something like that.
Okay.
The documentary. So this is like 90, this has got to be like 2001 or something like that. This is, I'll go back and look, but this is really, really early days. It might be early 2000s. And so that was the first time we ever really did any content. And because we were a national company, but we did a lot of things out of LA, just because that's where all the artists are. LA, Nashville, New York, really, that's really where most of all the musicians are. So that's how it started. And then we kind of got into this groove of doing those small things, but and just bringing things to life that were happening in the store to video, and then doing these, clinics were a big thing back then. And then eventually graduated into more curated storytelling. And then that's when, I bumped into, one of the guys that at the time it was the Collective, and they were managing, the Collective had like Big Boy and Linkin Park and, Enrique Iglesias, and had all these crazy artists and, Slash, and they were all at this management group. And I ran into a buddy of mine, or I met a buddy of mine there. And he just like, hey, this should be a TV show. Some of these ideas we're working on. I was like, you're crazy. You're just going to, want a retailer's show. And so we went and had a bunch of meetings, and from everyone from, MTV to E1 to ultimately DirecTV. And DirecTV was the first to believe in what we wanted to do. They were launching a new network, and that was how the TV show was born. And then it just sort of snowballed from there. I mean, that was probably 2010.
And this is like wild, like big budget time.
Huge
as well.
Budget. Yeah. I mean, like semi trucks, in the parking lot, and we would do it in the store. And the idea was for us of like, well, how is it a brand tool? Our goal was to drive traffic. I mean, in a world where like brick and mortar, especially now, is really challenging. And I think it ebbs and flows. I think it goes through, like, people love experiences. They hate the inconvenience of the experience. And so what we were trying to do at the time was, with Amazon on the rise and competition as a Guitar Center, was how do we create a reason? We had these playgrounds for musicians, 300 of them across the country. And how do you get people to want to come into them? And it was like, we'll show them what this great experience was. And that's why the whole idea was at Guitar Center, all the great things that happen at Guitar Center. And so the idea of the show is we filmed the show in the store. And we actually did that for multiple seasons before it eventually had enough equity till we felt, then we started doing crazy stuff like taking over rooftops at South by Southwest and doing 50th anniversary concert with Linkin Park. And, we did stuff in Times Square. It got crazy. And then we started making documentaries and films. And just because of the momentum, we found this momentum, and along the way had to consistently explain to the board and leadership why this was meaningful. Because as you can imagine, your hardest job as a marketer is to convey ROI to a CFO, especially if you've got a CFO who's like fringe and not and doesn't understand they work a lifestyle brand. I mean, like, I think there's value to that in one way, because you've got sort of the scale of justice to make sure that you don't go too far one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, figuring out how to convey value and the media was in making content was a big endeavor, especially when you have a television show and you're making documentaries. And the upside is, if you had a great partner back then, they were hungry for content. DirecTV was covering 90% of the costs. I mean, multi-million-dollar budget. And then we were, obviously producing and covering that side of it. But that's really how it started, as a small idea in a parking lot in Northridge, in the early aughts, and then turned into a TV show, and then national radio shows. And it really was a mecca for content development and providing and at the end of the day, it was done out of necessity. Artists needed a platform to be discovered. And And we said, look, our job is to keep people wanting to play music. We need people to play music. The more you play music, the more instruments and tools that you need. And so it was sort of like, we saw ourselves as like the pump in the circle of life for, musicians. And that was the idea, like provide tools for them to be exposed and successful. And if we can do that, hopefully we'll meet some new guitar players along the way in a hero worship driven business.
And who was owning the content or like the IP of all of that at the time?
Yeah,
Did it just depend on the artist or?
So it's a good question. Because I have an interesting perspective on this. Because it evolved over the years. Like majority of the time we owned it. We owned the IP. And we licensed it to the network partner. And then of course, because the way it all works, especially too, when you do music content, is there's so many, like you might own the IP, but you don't own the publishing, you don't own the mechanicals. And so like really what you've got, an archived project if the artist won't relicense you the music, because nobody does anything in perpetuity. So that was usually the way that we did it. And then every once in a while, we would do a deal, like if we wanted a specific artist that didn't need to do it, we would do an interesting deal. Like Peter Gabriel was the pilot, which I couldn't believe we got fucking Peter Gabriel to do the pilot episode. And I couldn't believe when he said yes. I was like, really? And then he wanted to own his show. So we let Peter own the show for his. And then when I would work with like Clapton, we always let Clapton own whatever we did because, he's sort of, guitar Jesus and, whatever Eric wants. He doesn't have to do anything. So if he wanted to work with us, we would usually let Eric on whatever he did. And then same thing with Slash. Like when we did Slash's documentary, part of the deal was because we couldn't pay him, right? Like we put all the money into the production. What we said was like, hey, you give us the broadcast window for the first 2 years. And then after those 2 years, you can have all of the rights to DVD. And so like if you go on Amazon today, you can go buy that documentary we made in that live concert, and Slash gets the money. I don't get any money. Like Guitar Center doesn't get any money. DirecTV's not getting any money. And that's a way that we can help artists, because at the end of the day, I think that needs to be the balance. I think people forget about that. It's like in a hero worship business, we need heroes. And I think too often we're worried about what we get is the brand. Yeah. And I think we're really selfless, and we go, look, now I sell beer, you guys sell t-shirts, you sell tickets, you're selling, we want to create platforms where everyone can thrive, because without heroes, like who are we going to use to help us, tell stories and create excitement and get people out of their living rooms. So we're always thinking about it that way. We wanted the artists to win. We want the athletes to win, and that's something that's sort of a common thread between everything that I at least try to do.
Yeah. And was there any? I mean, kind of like the roster of like some of the artists that you were working with, just insane. I mean, it's top level. I mean, was there any projects? I guess there's probably multiple where you just thought like, okay, this is going to be either too wild or too tricky to kind of pull off, where it's either kind of dealing with talent or dealing with, there's so many variables, right? Kind of looking at like different locations or different.
Over the years, it was probably, I was at Guitar Center for almost 19 years, and then Ernie Ball had a gnarly roster too. But yeah, there's so many good stories. One day I should write a book because there's so many gnarly stories. But I would say one of the ones that stands out to me in an incredible way was South by Southwest. I don't remember the year it was. I think it was 2014. It might have been my last year because I kind of left on a bang. Like it was the biggest year ever for me. And then that's when Aries leveraged out Bane, and they brought in some guy from like Joann's Fabrics who was the CEO, and it just got fucking weird. It lost the culture. And that's when I ended up going to Ernie Ball, because that was the first guitar string brand I played, and I idolized that brand. And Sterling Ball, who was Ernie Ball's son, who's 60 years old, was like a mentor of mine for 20 years. But South by Southwest, I think 2014, we had it was the first big live Guitar Center sessions, and we had this crazy little house, and this is before the crazy transformation of Austin. And we had this crazy house. I don't know, it wasn't on Rainier, it was wherever it was, but it was like 900 person capacity. And we had Snoop Dogg, Soundgarden, Damon Albarn, the 1975, Fanagram. It was a 3-night concert, and the city found like that we always went unofficial because I just hated the idea
900 capacity.
900 capacity, and we always went unofficial. So we were always like, and we're not going to give we're not going to pay South by Southwest all this money. Like, it was the rebel musician spirit. Even though we were a multi-billion-dollar brand that we'd grounded into that, we still showed up and we're like just anti. It was very much like the Fade, because we'd always work with Fader and then John Cohen and Levi's, and we were always part of that cool kind of like, we all believed in this sort of like anti-corporate culture and like, let's just do things guerrilla. So we have this incredible lineup of TV shows and concerts we're going to throw, and the city finds out, and I get on with the city, and this, like, I don't remember what he was, but he just read me the riot act because they pulled our sound permit. They're like, are you guys out of your minds? You are not hosting these concerts at a 900 person venue. Like, no way. So they pulled our permit, and like, this is like a week before South by, 10 days, something crazy like that. And we end up having to we call the C3 guys, and they have like a parking garage across from their offices, and they're like, we know this guy, and this guy's name was Bill Ball, and we show up and he's a Texan. I mean, just big, burly, buckle the size of an iPad, and he owned like all these parking garages, and he owned like exotic zoos where you go hunt exotic animals, and it was just a trip. And we go out there and we're like, so the problem, I'm committed to all these artists. I'm committed to all these, DirecTV's freaking out because it's, we got probably, $500,000 on the line of production. And then I got all these artists that are committed, that are flying in for it. And we're like 10 days out and we don't have a permit. And so we were able to get the C3 guys helped us get the permit. And then we moved to this parking garage, and we had to saw out all of the pylons on top of the parking garage and crane stages onto the parking garage, and we just barely pulled the thing off. And it was epic. It was on this, like, you can go watch them on YouTube. I mean, it was like Snoop Dogg killed it. The interviews are great. Took 10 years off my life. And at least I went out at South by with a bang, but man, that was hairy. And it just shows that, like, we had a great team and we pulled it off and we made some really good art. And I don't think I've been back to South by since. Maybe it broke me, but that was probably one of the craziest story. Artists storm off and leave, and they're like, we haven't finished taping, and like, Billy Idol like storms off the set, and we're like, where did Billy Idol go? And he's just like, he like his gal brought the wrong shoes, and so he left. And like, so we have to like tape the next day and figure out how to do it. There's a million of those stories, and artists are, they're creative for a reason. I mean, they're tortured, crazy. So we're all tortured, crazy souls, and I think that's what gets us up and drives us. But yeah, I mean, that's probably the craziest story over the years, where I got a lesson taught to me by some cowboys in Austin, Texas.
And that was the final year that you were there, and then you went on to Ernie Ball after that, right? So kind of like leaving on a bang.
Yeah, in 2015, we did a bunch of really cool stuff with the Roots in New York, and 2014, I think I left in January 2015. So at the 50th anniversary, which was kind of awesome because it was like there's this epic trailer that we made that's on my website that just had like, that year was like, I think we did 22 episodes of TV. We did like crazy Times Square takeover, a 50th anniversary concert with Linkin Park at the Wiltern. And, so many podcasts, so many radio shows. Like, it was kind of total music. It was music, content at its highest form that I think anybody was doing. I mean, the YouTube channel was not, we were like neck and neck with like Nike and Red Bull on subscribers and views, and we were just, it was a machine. And I think the challenge a lot of times with content, and I have this conversation often with colleagues who are in, sometimes run into similar headwinds that I've ran into over the course of my career, is brand equity and, sort of culture and purpose can oftentimes be taken for granted. You get used to them. It's like having anytime you buy something new, you're excited for like 3 months, you get a new car, you're like, oh, this is great. And then after like 6 months, you're like, meh. yeah, man, like that's cool. Like, what's the next thing? And I think a lot of time like that can get taken for granted in an organization, especially when you're dealing with like the daily issues of sales and logistics and EBITDA and you're running a business. And sometimes the thing to look at and go like, hey, well, how can we save some money or how can we be more profitable? Like some of the first places people like to look is like, well, why do we need this? Why do we need to make TV shows? Or like, why should we be making this stuff? And I think that, ultimately, and look, I think Nike ran into that, right? I don't want to judge other great, amazing brands, but I mean, I think you see brands kind of come and go in that. They run into that. And there's a few of them that have just, I mean, nobody does it better than Red Bull. I mean, fierce, uncompromising, unwavering commitment to this is who we are. And I don't think it's changed in 30 years, right? And I think discipline and remembering how precious these things are is one of the most important things. And I think the greatest responsibility of a CMO is to just constantly be the champion of that and drive alignment, because it takes years to build and that momentum to build. And when it goes away, it goes, it sort of trails off. It doesn't stop. I mean, the equity that you've created of those brands will sustain over time, but they do gradually dissipate. But once they dissipate, you try to start over, there is this it's like walking through the desert. Of like, it takes years to rebuild that. And so, yeah, once you get that momentum going, it's probably one of the greatest responsibilities you have is to keep it going and keep the entire organization as a champion to why, brand matters. It's the why of any brand, why this brand. And then the rest of it is all why this brand now. And, but yeah, you can't have why now if you don't have why, if that makes sense.
How did you find it kind of switching over, like being involved in the music industry for a while, like your whole career, and then kind of shifting into beer and kind of having that opportunity at Firestone Walker? Yeah, what was that like? Was the kind of outset from the beginning as like, okay, like this is going to be lifestyle, and then it's sort of taken that, and everything that you've learned?
Yeah, when I actually met the guys I met David Walker, and the Firestone Walker guys through the music piece. It ended up coming because one of the guys at Firestone was working with an artist who was managed by a guy named Shane Frulin. And Shane's a great friend of mine who I met through Mike Ness and Social Distortion. And we had done Mike was actually, when I left Guitar Center and I started my next film project with DirecTV, was called The Pursuit of Tone, and I needed someone to do the pilot episode, and I asked Mike to do it because I thought it would be a great story, and he's agreed, which to this day, I mean, I don't think we would have had a series if Mike wouldn't done the pilot. And so I actually they were looking for someone, and they had asked, Shane, and he's like, oh, this dude just left Ernie Ball. Like, it was like the day after I had decided to leave Ernie Ball. And so I got a call, and I went and met the guys, and I was just like, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know shit about beer. Like, I don't know why, I'm probably not your guy. Like, but, get a cool brand to see your billboards. And David Walker said to me, I got enough people that understand the beer business here. I think I've got a lifestyle brand on my hands, and I want someone that really understands how to build brands and tell stories, and that understands culture. And so that was sort of like jumped at that opportunity to go from music to beer. I think, music at the time I left was maybe a $7.5 billion global music instruments was $7.5 billion global business, and beer, I think they just said was the latest number just came out. I think it's some in the mid 800 billion number. And so when you think of the sheer scale of beverage and adult beverage, it's pretty substantial. So it was, there was a lot of stuff that was like natural adaptation and evolution, like things that strategy applies no matter what you're doing. If you're driving CPG brands or, telling stories, like there's so much stuff that's just, it's a muscle, you understand, and it applies. But a lot of the crazy parts were like the laws, alcohol laws. I came in like, I've got all the best ideas. I was like, what about this? What about this? What about this? And compliance was like, yeah, it's illegal. You can't do that. That's illegal.
And it's different in different states, right? Over in the US.
Yeah, different in different states. Yeah.
Yeah.
The joke often is like, I kind of have, two bosses. I have a CEO and I have the head of compliance who, and look, they're great and they're often are attorneys, and you're just always like, hey, how do we do this? Like, or what's the way to achieve what we need to achieve? But yeah, by state, by category, to so to speak, a non-alc beer, it's like different rules than alc beer. And even though there's just, then you get into wine and spirits and it gets crazy. So I think that was really challenging. And then the biggest one for me was the wholesaler dynamic. I spent 20 something years in the beer business, especially when I was at Ernie Ball, like dealing with our global business. Like you hire and fire your supplier, your wholesalers, you set your price. In the beer business, you do not set your price. The wholesalers do, and you do not hire and fire your wholesalers. Like it's a different 3-tier system that was built on, post prohibition, and they have so many brands. So learning to navigate, how do you be the best supplier? How do you stand out in a sea of sameness? Like how do you motivate the network? And you got to be chain driven, and it's really, there's a lot of dynamics that you can have the best brand in the world. You can have a perfectly curated Instagram. You could have cool influencers. If you can't figure out how to get your product from your brewery to a retailer and priced effectively, you're dead in the water. I mean, you dealt with some of that over the years, right? With Liquid Death, right? I mean, even in the water business, it's not easy in the beverage business.
It's pretty gnarly, and then kind of looking at the different countries and everything. And that was a ride. With, kind of looking at that and sort of looking at beverages as a category and beer. I mean, at the time, like a number of like craft breweries, it was like something like 9,000. Like how are you then kind of, I guess, not directly competing, but standing out and kind of having a voice and having like multiple brands under the portfolio, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's I think it was like 9,600 craft breweries in the US last year, something like that. It actually went
which
up.
it's insane. Right.
Yeah, like a bunch will close, like 400 will like shut down, and then like 500 will open. And what's great about it is that, craft beer, David has this great analogy, David Walker, one of the co-founders, tall, handsome British guy, is that it's like, craft beer sometimes like local bakers, like the best bread is like, is the local, you go in, you buy your bread locally, and the closer you are to the bakery, the better the beer is. And you can say the same thing about like meat and things like that, right? And so craft early on was sort of this movement of all these local regional players. And today it predominantly is still, majority regionalized. I mean, think of so many of these 9,500 craft breweries. I mean, these are local pop-up, microbreweries that just have a tap room or two, and they have a little healthy business because like they're the cool spot in town to go. They're curious tinkers that are constantly making these things. And then there's breweries over the course of decades that became national. Sierra Nevada, one of the first big ones, New Belgium. And then, Firestone was in that sort of first sort of era, 1996, but they stayed, fairly regional. I think when I got there, 28, 29 states, because to go from to truly be national, you have to function a brewery on the East Coast, because just shipping beer cold, especially craft beer that's not pasteurized, and that's a big piece of what we don't pasteurize our beer. So it's it needs to be consumed relatively fresh, and you got to keep it cold the whole way. It's made cold, shipped cold, best enjoyed cold. You're putting beer on a refrigerated truck and shipping it across the country. That's, not super cost effective. So there's still, and that's just the mechanism of what you decide you want to be. And, again, that's quote David again, but he said, I'd rather be in and out than Five Guys. And that's an interesting philosophy, right? Like, oh, you can be regional and have a thriving business, versus, try to be, anywhere and everywhere. And ultimately it comes down to, what leadership ultimately wants, and, what the thresholds for the business are. So, I mean, it's challenging sometimes to work at a place that's grow at all costs versus, hey, we don't need to be the biggest, but maybe let's be the most profitable and the most successful is what we can be. And so we say a lot at Firestone, or I say a lot, is like, we want to be the most globally revered, regionally available, beer company on the planet, and until, it's logical to expand, but you don't want to expand at all costs, because then you just, you end up getting over your skis. And in a business where and it's different, right? I mean, when you think about, you're running your business against, when you're VC or PE money, and like where like EBITDA isn't a thing in the first, 10 years, where it's just like spend to grow. And then, we're running a healthy business, and it's hard to be competitive when people are willing to give their products away. And, and they don't hold themselves to the same profitability metrics. So, it's what's cool about beer, and we remind ourselves and everybody all the time, is think about, you could say the car industry is probably pretty similar. There's a couple of industries that are similar, but like Modelo's been around for 100 years, like Budweiser, 150 years. Like these are not, there are very few overnight successes in the beer business.
Yeah.
You're dealing with brands 30, 40, 50, 100 years old. Corona, I mean, Pacifico's, Kona. These brands have been around a long time, and 805 in the scheme of things is an infant, 13 years old. So,
Was that it?
a lot of,
805?
yeah, only 13 years old, 2012. Yeah. The guys didn't start 805 until, I get 15 years after they started the brewery. So, yeah, I mean, so that's, it's all about find your brands, build your brands, so, invest in those core brands, keep innovating, keep coming up with new ideas, but don't forget who got you to the dance, and realize that it's going to take, I look at this, like my job at Firestone is like, I think about, look, I love working at Firestone. I could work at Firestone till I retire, but I still have to think about, I've got to hand this thing off to I'm going to hand this thing off to a Firestone or a Walker. Like, one of the kids that grows up and probably runs the company next is like, who are we giving this to? So we're, basically shepherds of the brand until the next, then we have to hand it over to someone else. And I think that's rare. And I think that's rare in a world of, where people are kind of chasing cloud or growth. And when you work for a founder-led organization, there's a different like energy, because you realize like the consequences of crazy erratic decisions, or maybe poor decisions, are quite substantial. Like, it's not like, oh, that didn't work out, I'm going to go do the next thing. It's like, you don't want to leave a path of destruction for a family. And so there's a lot of thoughtfulness that goes into, how we manage those brands.
Especially when their names, it's on the product, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and they're great people, and they're the greatest people too. I mean, it's like, so you want to, there's a huge level of responsibility of, you've got not just someone's business in your hands, you have their legacy. And that's, kind of crazy. But, that was something that, like, when I was a guitar center, I didn't think that way. It was just like, Aries or Bain had invested in us. It was like, it was a machine, and you did it. But when I went to Ernie Ball, that's where it really hits you, because you're like, shit, this has consequences for families, and their name. And so ever since, and that's why I really enjoy those type of challenges, because I just think it's so much more rewarding to be a part of something like that.
And then how is it like working on, I guess, the like 805, the lifestyle sort of Central Californian aspect of the brand, and it's kind of combining all these like aesthetics, right? From action sports, from moto, surf, skate, music as well, and kind of taking that. That must be pretty fun to work across.
Yeah, it was sort of a different approach from going from musicians to like X Games
athletes
jumping dirt bikes, and surfers, and skaters, and a lot of these guys we brought on while I joined, but when I started, by the time I joined, 805 was a thing. And my goal was like, hey, how do I put jet fuel on it and help it continue to grow it, and bringing a lot of like those same ideas to the company of like, okay, how do we be disruptive? How do we be disrupted in a crazy beer business, where we can stand out? And it was just sort of a brand first mentality. And then of course, endless conversations about strategy and positioning and packaging. And of course, all those things come with it. But the tip of the spear always was, why 805, and what does 805 stand for? And it's a brand that's story is told through the lens of its customers, which are authenticos, which the authentic athletes. And then we just started building a roster of these different verticals that spoke to what the central coast of California was all about. And which is weird because I grew up in the 805. I mean, I went to high school in the 805, down at the bottom of the 805, but it was so weird all these years later, like here I am, driving this brand that is, perpetuating the idea of what the life here is like. And what's cool about it here is it's everything from cowboys to, you got ski, snow, cowboys, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And crazy, awesome Hispanic population and heritage. And so what we started to do is bring all of these different verticals up and find all these different voices and then find a way to meld them all together in a cool way. And I think the latest campaign does a really good job of that because it's this awesome script and it's a voice of all these different individuals showing what they're doing and talking about what makes the 805 more than a beer. It's a way of life. And bringing those guys all together, but then also breaking them out into their little verticals. And like when we do Cinco de Mayo, it's Tropa Magica and, Carlos Balderas and boxers and, Frankie. So it's just trying to find that vertical of how we could bring all these athletes in, tell cool stories, do it in a way that was legal because, obviously you don't want to show a guy, you can't show someone like chin a beer and then go hop on a dirt bike. Right. So we have to be super responsible about how we
unless
market
it's a
those
zero
things.
or something, right?
Unless it's a zero. And the thing is like what makes the gig really crazy too is there are guidelines and laws and there's stuff with the FCC, there's stuff where they're just sort of like best practices. But there's a lot of breweries that do not follow the rules and they either don't know about them. There's a lot of big ones that do stuff that is illegal. That would be considered in violation of advertising law. And that's probably because somebody doesn't know. Like, you get a social media, person and they're doing things that are, borderline. Like, it's hard to be, it's tough sometimes because, we are very, very, very focused on playing by the rules. And it sucks sometimes to lose or, to maybe not have the same, maybe digital success as a campaign because you can't, we sometimes we'll have this great thing like, oh, this is so good. And it's like, can't use it. You can't respond, reasonably or responsibly use that marketing. And so
is it an age restriction potentially or
consumption, you can't show people just like shit in beers and you can't show irresponsible consumption. And I think
doing shoeies and stuff and like
it's frowned upon. And I don't know if that's the same case in Australia or other places. Like I'm not an expert on international beverage advertising, but I know what we can and can't do here. So there are limitations. But anyways, to answer your question, we sat down with all these different athletes and we just tried to figure out like we found the narrative of like what story can we tell that's important to them? What story can we tell that delivers on what 805 is all about? And ultimately, found a couple of really cool lanes. And then when I bumped Connor Coffin called, maybe, I don't know, a year or two into my time at Firestone. I actually knew Connor from Ernie Ball. And he was just like, but I didn't know who Connor was. Like, I know Connor was I knew he was a surfer and kid from Santa Barbara, great kid. And, he wanted some guitar strings. And so I was like, yeah, let's hook Connor up with some guitar strings. And, I know he was like one of the top surfers in the world. I'm not like a hardcore surfer. I'm a musician. So like, to me, it was just sort of surf culture, very aware of surf culture, but I wasn't aware of like, I didn't follow like Kelly Slater and Andy Irons. I wasn't obsessed with that. A lot of dudes on the team at Firestone Walker are very, very obsessed with that culture. So he called and was like, hey, I would love to work with you guys. And I did, 30 seconds of Googling on like, hey, what's Connor up to? And I was like, shit, he's number 4 in the world right now. Like, and he's from the 805. He's from Santa Barbara and he represents, a huge piece of what the brand's all about. Ended up in a partnership together that led to the World Surf League. Colin,
I was just going to ask, like, was that kind of like the decision that flows onto it, right? And then if you were going to do a bigger partnership, it fits in.
I mean, I was sort of anti, I'm like not big on sponsorships, to my detriment sometimes, because I think it's just a vicious world of lack of loyalty. I really believe in investing in your own legend. And unless you are going to do a deal with somebody that's long-term that you can build around, and we can talk about the WSL because that's how we did it with the WSL. But you just you pay a festival, you slap your logo on it. I mean, you're getting some distribution, you maybe do a little contest, you do something in the trade, it goes away and nobody fucking remembers. And unless you maybe you did a cool experience that somebody came in and had a moment, and maybe a handful of people went to some sort of amazing festival and had a brand experience and left. But for the most part, those people running their sponsorships, they're bonused and KPI'd against, hey, I got to make the most amount of money possible.
Yeah.
You can't win a spending war. I mean, it was hard for you, I'm sure, in the water business. It's hard in the soda business. It's hard in the beer business because there's always somebody with a way bigger checkbook than you. And if they want it, they've got it. And so a sponsorship manager's understanding of revenue opportunity. It's I have to constantly explain, listen, what they can pay you versus what I can pay you are two, they're different. They're not even different planets. They're different galaxies, what someone will, what an ABI. I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars of what, we'll come in and we'll be a 0.1% of that type of spend. So what we try to do is,
and they're looking at the spend, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, they're not looking at is this the best fit for the event or the festival? It is, yeah.
So everything that we do is really about investing in our own legend, and we try to find, and we've got great partnerships with Red Bull and, with Day in the Dirt and a lot of the events we do with them, and because we share athletes, and so it's really about investing in your own legend. So when the WSL came to us, they actually didn't have any beer partner. I think AB had just pulled out with Mich Ultra, and it was, it was real serious money. And we ended up getting it to a point that was it was a huge bet for us. They obviously took a huge haircut on what the category was getting previously, because it was coming from, a macro domestic brand. This is
it was Corona, I think, years
it was
ago.
Corona globally and Mich Ultra domestically. And
okay.
I think it was Mich Ultra had left to do basketball or something like that. This is 4 or 5 years ago. So we came in and we said, hey, look, we'll be the craft partner. We can't afford to be the whole beer partner. And then they ended up putting a whole, they brought Pacifico in, and it's good for everybody. I mean, beer companies talking about beer and getting people excited about beer is good for everybody. So we ended up getting a deal done with the WSL, but the whole focus around it was our athletes, storytelling, content, programming. So we created the Cold Beer Surf Club, which was a podcast series with Connor. We started an athlete empowerment program, and we found emerging surfers over 21 that were young on the tour that needed, I mean, think about this. They have to travel all over the world to go surfing, and they don't make a ton of money. There's all sponsorship driven. So we found a couple of young kids that needed they were 21, 22. They needed, we started the booster program, and then we found Kira Pinkerton and Nolan Raposa, and we started that. And then we had an apparel line, and we just built around it. We had trade programs. And in things that are some shared IP and things that are our IP, we own Cold Beer Surf Club, we license it back to them as part of this partnership. And we're in, now we have a model that is stay together for the kids. It's not just about the money. It's about culture and storytelling and pushing the industry forward. And that creates a really sticky partnership. It makes it hard for both of us to not want to do it. So, we're in the renegotiation phase now for our extension, and, we'll get that done because we both want to work together. And we've got all of these cool pieces. And so for us, every partnership we approach that's significant, I mean, there's a lot of small things. I mean, we do 1,800 event days a year. They look at a team of event marketers and sponsorships, and we do a lot of that. But the big ones are very much focused on, we have to build something that has gravity and stickiness and, some evergreen potential. So that way we can continue to really maximize the effort and try to have everything at least a 3-year runway, because I hate one and dones, because you're by the time you even figure out what you should do and can do and did it work or not, it's over.
It's finished.
And then, maybe somebody came in and scooped you. And the other problem is if you do really cool shit, you set the bar, that's the baseline for what everybody does next year. Because we live in a world of best idea wins, but everybody, it's a copycat industry, in marketing. So you do something really cool, that becomes now everybody next year is doing that. You know, like everybody wants that thing. And then you're like, shit, what's the next thing that I got to do? So we're always saying like front windshield, just like, what's the next thing? How do we keep pushing forward? Because our value is in being a good partner. You know, I'll tell every sponsorship person I talk to, I am the worst sponsor you'll ever have. I'm the best partner you'll ever have, but I'm a terrible sponsor. Like we're not good at writing checks. We're not good at just like giving you money, showing up to a cool VIP day and being like, wow, this is great. Like, we're going to be like, hey, so how do we create, like, we're going to want to create some sort of content series. We're going to have athletes to build around. We're going to want to create groundswell. We're going to want to create tools and apparel and all of these things around the beer, you know, because at the end of the day, you got to create that consumption moment or the energy of like, you know, we want people to wear our brand, not just hold a can in their hand. So, so that's kind of how we approach sponsorships, and it working out. WSL is one of the best experiences I've had in my professional career because that company is just full of people who care about what they do. They care about the surfers, maybe sometimes too much. But they don't run it like it's obviously a business, but they're very much like surf culture first. And, so we've been able to do some really awesome things with them. And Connor and Lakey, Lakey was a great ad for us.
Yeah. What would you say? I mean, if you could kind of sum it up, for like what's been effective over your career in marketing and sort of the best way for storytelling, what would it be, do you reckon?
Good question. Probably a couple answers, because I think that effective is in, does someone care and want to watch it? I think everything that you have I'm only interested in making emotive work, which is a detriment sometimes, because there's just some things I don't want to do that are effective. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like viral TikTok throwaway. I can't get excited about that as an artist. And even though, so I would say that like for me, success has always been emotive, sticky work that stands for something clear and enduring and that people talk about. It's that saying, speak to the core loud enough that everybody else can hear it. Everything that we do, we want to just be so culturally important that it makes an impact. I was at a wedding for Connor, and I was sitting next to Keith Malloy, and he's probably going to hate that I say this, but he said to me, he had done a film for us, and he goes, man, more people talk to me about what I do with 805 than Yeti, because he's like the Yeti guy, but he goes, more people talk to me about the stuff I do with 805, just because it's just different, and obviously he lives in the 805, and, Connor lives in the 805, but I think that from a credibility perspective and, I think emotive stickiness, brand affinity piece, I think you've just got to make work that is powerful and important, authentic. And I can't get into chasing the short wins of like, it was funny. And, cause everybody does that. It's like, look at a beer, like watch the Super Bowl, right? It's all the same. It's all
everyone's
really
just for comedy, and
it's amazing work. I mean, like, it's amazing, but like how many different spots is Peyton Manning in? How many different spots are like all of the same faces? And at a certain point you remember the joke, but do you remember which brand was which? And I think that's a tough business to be in. And that's that ad business of like, what's the next hot thing that everyone talks about the Tuesday after the Super Bowl? And I'm thinking about like 10 years, like what, or what are we building over time? So and because I can't play that game financially either, like I can't afford Post Malone or Shane Gillis or, so I think that, very effective emotive work that's sticky and, try to find it to work on all the different verticals. And then I think, what is your strategic amplification strategy? Because in the music business, you make a thing with Metallica, like we did a film with Metallica. It had 20 million views in like the first 18 hours, just because they posted about it, turned on. The toll booths between you and your customer weren't quite as big and robust as they are now. And now you live in a world where like there's a toll booth at every stop between you and your customer. So the idea of going organic and viral today, like, I think I got a better chance to get hit by lightning than that happening. So like, what's the strategic amplification strategy of all this content? And, have we built a mousetrap that is effective and that from tip to tail that we can drive down to the consumer to make sure that, and we're making work that ties back to, is there a brand strategy? Did it move volume? And I think that, like, I take film. So the strategy now is like, if I make a film, that film footage is going to be used in commercial, and that commercial and POS and trade materials will be full 360, and I can drive that all the way down to retail. And so really I can justify the expense of a film in the cost of just a total campaign versus like making films and making TV commercials separately. We try to tie those all together to make this really nice full 360 strategy. So, ultimately work that's important, and it's hard. Look, there's not a KPI for culturally important work. I mean, sure, I guess you could go do focus groups and things like that, but there has to be a level of instinct and, just a personal taste of, like, by the team that we've built to do this good work. And then what's our strategy to drive it out? And then, of course, do we drive it all the way down to show some sort of lift and or efficacy to, did it drive sales? And so, in my position at the end of the day, that's like, I've got to be, and I try to teach all the awesome kids on the team and the great talents on the team to, like, think like that. Because if you can get that muscle early in life about the why and the how, then you'll be able to continue to hopefully have a career of doing bigger and better things, because you can tie it into some sort of purpose. And it's just not doing cool stuff for the sake of doing cool stuff. It has to drive business. It has to be profitable. And if you can do that, then you can convince a board every year to give you the budget to go do, incredible things. And so that's kind of the long view that I've had on it. And you got to find the right brand to work at to be able to do that, because, that's not every brand. There's a lot of brands,
right? Yeah.
I don't think, Salesforce, needs to think that way. Brands like that, SaaS companies, their messaging strategy or their consumer strategy is completely different. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's how I think about it.
And what, like, with the team, is that internal or external or a bit of a mixture?
Yeah, it's predominantly internal. All the brand management's in-house, creative's in-house. I've got, Jeremy Taylor, who's our head of creative. He was, 20 years advance, 5 years or so at Fender. And when I went to Firestone, he hit me up, and I was like, fuck, dude, I would love to work with you. So, we've been together now, I think 4 years.
Nice.
So we brought in, like, our head of 805 was like born and bred in the brewery and is, lives in Templeton. And, our head of Firestone, we just got this great, amazing in-house team. I think the marketing team's about 30 something people. And, everyone's like an assassin. It's like the Navy SEALs, like, everybody is great. And then we have this awesome network of, like, independent creators. We'll work with an agency from time to time, but even then they're like boutique. Like, it's like, I've got a list of filmmakers I've worked with my whole career for 20 years. So, I still work with all of those filmmakers and all of those photographers. And,
Nice.
We just have different filmmakers for different projects. And, like, if we want to do a music thing, there's, like, go-to music guys. If we're doing a surf thing, there's go-to surf guys. Because especially when you're like, hey, I need someone in the water. You're like,
Yeah.
I don't even know if half of the guys I would use for music know how to swim, let alone shoot surf imagery. So we have this awesome mountain bike, moto, and we just have this roster of photographers, filmmakers, illustrators, kids that work at cool skateboard companies. When we want to do, like, a cool skate thing, we work with them for that. And so we have, like, this just awesome network of individual contributors. And I think it's it's the best way to do it effectively. Like, the thing I always struggled to work in the agencies is, like, Guitar Center, we had some mega agencies. And you walk in there and they've got bars and coffee shops, and you're like, is this where all my fucking money goes? Like, is this what...
Just entertaining people,
yeah,
like, come in, right?
Yeah, and, like, now we're so frugal that we're like, we don't want to waste a dollar on anything. We want the dollar to be, like, in the work. And so, look, obviously we have the luxury of not having to go that route. And obviously, I got friends that work at 72 and Sunny and other brands, and, they do, the best work in the world. But I think our approach has been independent individual contributors, because then what's also awesome about that is they all live in the vertical that you're working with, and they all love it so much that I can see the difference between, work that was expensive and good and maybe affordable and good because there was more passion for the project because they just loved that sport. Like the kids who shoot dirt bikes for us these guys, they live in the neighborhood. This is what they do every single day. They live down the street from Tyler Behrman, and that they go out and they shoot this every day. So when we hire them to make a dirt film or project for us, they're doing it because they love what they do. And so ultimately everybody we try to work with, we work with because they love what they do. And I think that's a great force multiplier in just creating incredible work for, a fraction of the cost.
100%. Nice one. And if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way of getting in contact?
I got a website, DustinHinz.com, or just LinkedIn. But yeah, pretty straightforward.
Awesome.
I've got nothing to sell.
Yeah. Thanks for your time, Dustin. It was great having you on the pod, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks again. I really appreciate the opportunity to wax poetic and think back on some good old days. But yeah, thanks again. Appreciate what you're doing for the industry too. It's good to have people talking about this stuff. All right, brother.
Yes,